Take a look at the devastation this morning. There it is right there in Philadelphia. The train was headed from Washington to New York. Busiest line in America, just around 9:30 last night, 5 miles out of Philadelphia. All 7 cars, including the engine, came off the track. 3 of the cars, you see one right there, toppled on their side, one nearly upside down on its roof.
At 9:21 p.m. on May 12, 2015, Amtrak passenger train 188 derailed at a location known as the Frankfurt Junction Curve, Philadelphia, killing 8 people and injuring 145 others. The train was traveling over 106 miles per hour, more than twice the maximum permitted speed on that section. Why does an experienced, knowledgeable driver with a perfect disciplinary record travel so fast on a notoriously sharp section of track? Before we delve into the tragedy, please can you like and subscribe for more real-life horror videos. The afternoon on the 12th May started like no other. Amtrak train driver Brandon Bastion, a conductor and an assistant conductor, started their shift at 1:20 p.m. at New York's Pennsylvania station. After working on a train for the first part of their shift, the 3 arrived in Washington, D.C. at 5:19 p.m. After dinner, another assistant conductor was added to the crew and the 4 boarded the 7:50 p.m. Washington to New York train 188. After making several scheduled station stops, train 188 arrived at Philadelphia's 30th Street station at 9:06 p.m., whereby the driver made a number of routine checks on the train's pantograph. At 9:10 p.m., the train departed 30th Street station on Main Track 1. Alone in the cab, the driver maintained a steady speed of 30 miles per hour for the next section of track and was alerted by an emergency call from a SEPTA train near Diamond Street Bridge. The driver in the other train reported a smashed windscreen that had cut his face, which forced him to make an emergency brake application. This location was in a very troubling neighborhood, and reports of stones being thrown at trains was very common. The signaller contacted Brandon and advised him to switch the train from track 1 to track 2 to avoid the other stopped train. This section of line comprises of 4 tracks that run parallel to each other. Complying to the track speeds, he sped his train up to 65 miles per hour and correctly used his horn when passing the SEPTA train to warn workers who may have been around the damaged train. Everything appeared normal and all rules were continuing to be followed. This made the next step of events very puzzling. Shortly after the passing of the SEPTA train, Brandon moved the throttle to full power for 25 seconds to a speed of 96 miles per hour. This was despite the line speed only increasing to 80. At this stage, the train was 1.2 miles from the point of derailment, and despite the train recording the throttle being removed for 2 seconds and the maximum line speed reducing to 50 miles per hour, Brandon again applied full power for a further 20 seconds. The train at 9:20 p.m. had now reached 106 miles per hour and was beginning to enter the Frankfurt Junction. A local street camera shows the extreme speed of the train and the glow of the crash. After realizing the train was going too fast, he slammed on the emergency brakes, but it was too late. The train catastrophically derailed. The train's front CCTV camera shows the dramatic final moments of derailment. At 9:25 p.m, the first 911 call was made by a passenger, and in little over 15 minutes, over 40 emergency vehicles were in attendance. By 9:49 p.m, the deputy fire chief arrived and immediately ordered the event a mass casualty incident. Out of the 253 people on board, 145 were injured and 8 sadly lost their lives. Even though the driver's section had derailed, it remained largely untouched. However, the same cannot be said about the front 5 carriages where all the fatalities occurred. These struck many side structures and were severely damaged. The National Transport Safety Board were quickly notified and were at the scene at 6 a.m. the following day. Even though the driver had plenty of rest 7 days leading up to the crash, had driven through the junction hundreds of times before and was a very disciplined employee, Brandon's actions caused a severe derailment and loss of life. The NTSB immediately interviewed the driver to get his side of the event. Despite surviving the crash, the driver could not explain why he had sped up to dangerous speeds. It became obvious to the investigators that the initial SEPTA train, which suffered a broken windscreen, was on Brandon's mind. Having driven the route many times before, Brandon knew that many drivers had experienced rocks being thrown at their trains, and after hearing the trembling voice of one of his colleagues, he was extremely shaken up. Despite this, investigators examined the train's data, and when comparing his actions during the emergency call, they did not correlate with Brandon's anxious thoughts. During the call, Brandon's speed was consistent and his actions followed all rules. It was not until 27 seconds after the emergency call had ended that he decided to speed up his trains. Investigators knew that something else was to blame. The NTSB turned to the track and environment to see if that could have influenced the driver's action. Even though it was nighttime and in complete darkness, Brandon had done this route hundreds of times before. When studying the route, however, investigators found something very interesting. The speed limit after the Frankfurt curve does increase to 110 miles per hour, and when looking at the route prior to the curve, there is a very similar bend 2 miles before, which once passed requires the driver to increase speed. Did Brandon think he was past the Frankfurt curve already? Investigators wondered whether the driver suffered a loss in situational awareness due to his focus for nearly 1 minute being on the well-being of the driver of the SEPTA train, and also with the darkness not allowing him to see any breaking point landmarks. He may have believed he had already passed the junction, which resulted in him speeding the train up to the next maximum line speed of 110 miles per hour. Before he realized his mistake, it was too late. This is not the first time this has played a part in accident. In the 2002 collision of an Amtrak train in Baltimore, the driver also lost situation awareness of her location by focusing too much on regulating her speed, which resulted in another derailment. The investigation raised critical issues on the importance of technology in reducing train speed. Investigators learned that a train system known as positive train control is able to stop a train automatically without a driver's input. However, it was only installed on some sections of track. Unfortunately for train 1188, the Frankfurt junction was not one of them. Recommendations were made to not only have this installed on all areas of track, but to also have the train control cab manned by 2 employees rather than 1. This was to reduce the likelihood of situation awareness errors. Nearly 7 years after the crash, Brandon Bastion appeared in court charged with involuntary manslaughter, 238 counts of reckless endangerment, and causing a catastrophe. If found responsible for the crash, he would be spending his entire life in prison. On the 4th March 2022, a jury found Brandon not guilty on all counts. Whether you think it was his fault or not, it was a tragic event that changed many lives and could have easily been avoided.